Welcome to Neurodivergency, where neurodivergent voices and friends turn struggle into strength. We're here to break the stigma around mental health, dive into truth about our brains, and bring you real tools for clarity, healing, and hope. Today's guest is Barry Walton, an ADHD author and Emmy Award-winning documentary filmmaker. Barry, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Nice to meet you, Anthony.
Yeah, likewise. And thank you for sharing your inspiring story. I look forward to diving into it. Before we get
Just
into the story.
one thing we
Mhm.
might want to just be clear on. I'm an author with ADHD, but I haven't written anything on ADHD.
Yes.
Only because your intro might sound like I'm an author,
Yeah.
ADHD author that's written on the topic, which I have not.
Yes, that's a very good clarification. Indeed, both interpretations are possible. So tell us, what brings you here? What is your neurodivergent story?
Well, I mean, when I reach out, I think what you're doing is interesting. I think it's important to talk about these topics. I think there's a lot of people out there that struggle with neurodivergent or mental health or learning disabilities or a lot of those things in the mind that are not as clearly defined as I've got a knee injury and you can know exactly where the knee injury is, or I've got issues with my eyes and exactly the doctor knows how to resolve those. Our understanding of the brain is still pretty primitive, I would argue, in modern, quote unquote, modern medicine. And so because of that, we don't always know how to diagnose. We don't always know where you fall on the spectrum. So first, when I saw what you were doing, I saw that you were just wanted to open up on the topic of people who struggle with these things and have them talk about them publicly. I was like, hey, I would be interested because I've struggled with ADHD and learning disabilities throughout all of my life, and I've been on a spectrum within that because a lot of times it's not as easy as a diagnosis as you have one thing. Usually, if you have one thing, you have maybe borderline other things. You might be borderline bipolar. You might be borderline, paranoid-esque, you know. Wouldn't say paranoid
Yeah.
schizophrenic, but you might be in those things kind of coupled together on a rainbow at some level
Yeah.
of a range. So, when I heard you, so for me, I was like, hey, I've struggled with, and I'm clearer now than I've ever been before on it, but I've struggled with ADHD. And I'm clearer now because I started to go to a psychologist and a psychiatrist, and I started to kind of get help. And I can see a clear difference in that help. And it's taken a lot of fine tuning over a lot of years to kind of do that. So that's kind of the start for that's kind of both the
Yeah.
start and the end. The start was
Yeah.
in elementary. The start was when I was in the first grade and then second grade, and ultimately it climaxed in third grade. First and second grade, I just struggled with kind of paying attention in class. I struggled with reading and kind of being focused on topics. My teacher would say I was a daydreamer. I would stare out the window a lot. I didn't really focus on what her topics were. I would argue that like I thought school was pretty boring, but I was rare in that because a lot of the rest of the class, they were able to kind of pay attention and be focused. And so what it was attention deficit disorder. At that time was ADD. We didn't even know that was 19 that was in I started going to school in like 1979, so I was behind the curve, and I grew up in the country. So I was not in a city where lots of times a lot of this stuff is kind of first coming down. So
Yeah.
I was never diagnosed. as a young kid. Everyone said Barry's super hyper. He's a very energetic kid. And frankly, I'm thankful that I wasn't diagnosed because in this day and age, what happens for kids after diagnosis, they start to medicate, right? And when you start to medicate your kid, the risk of them having a drug misuse drugs spikes. And so fortunately for me, I think at some level, my parents never medicated me. They just accepted it for what it was. And at some point, they kind of just said, I don't know that we're going to be able to fix this. It is what it is. That impacted my academia. That impacted my ability to go through school. I'm amazed to this day that I did finish. I finished higher ed. I got a bachelor's degree. Um, Arguably, I skimmed by the skin on my teeth per se. But I did finish higher ed, which is a miracle. Now that I'm older and more focused, I take a very, very, very small dosage of Adderall, which is a methamphetamine, so it's a type of a speed. I take 5 milligrams. The recommended doses is between 10 and 20 milligrams. I think a lot of people actually take it for their own personal, it's like any of those
For
things. When a
sure.
drug is found to work for one person, it spreads like a wildfire, and people are like, "Oh, I can be more
Yeah.
focused. I can amp it up more." I'm like, and that's the human condition, fine, albeit, but to claim that, but to understand the struggles of having ADHD, I think, and just claim that you're ADHD are two very different things. For me, it's been a tumultuous road that has
Yeah.
led to a lot of impulsive decision making, inability to kind of focus on any career, any life's journey, any path, inability to build a long-term plan for myself and stick to it. Um, and just general kind of like my wavering in my decision making throughout life, which does not make for a great path towards success, which I've dreamed of throughout most of my life, was I'm going to achieve this. And because of my wavering and lack of focus, I'm all over the map on my way there. I'm not like a rocket headed to the moon. I'm like whatever. I'm like fireworks spraying out all over the place.
Yeah.
Um, so that's kind of like the summary of my life. I've talked about a lot of things
Yeah.
all over the map from elementary to where I'm
Yeah.
at today. But that's kind of the summary.
Yeah. I'm curious to know what did when the struggle in your life was at its worst, what did that look like? Or do you have a little snapshot, a picture that you could paint of really to give the context and the idea of what life looked like when you were really struggling?
Yeah, I think the best summary is to say that life was full of moments of great focus where I was so intently focused on something, like going to the Himalayas and filming, like traveling on a sailboat for 2 months with friends and filming a documentary. Um, Things that really excited me, where I was so intently focused. It was so intense, it was not sustainable. So I would go through these deeply intense periods of great focus where I achieved what I would argue are great kind of highlights in my career. And they would usually be followed by periods of confusion and fear and paranoia, where I would burn out, feel lost and misguided, not know how to get back on track, not know how to get back to the place that I was because the focus periods were so intense, they weren't sustainable. They burned out. It would just fire and then burn out. And then I'd be like,
Yeah.
where am I? What am I doing? And I would go through deep lows, depression. And during those times, I was confused. I did not know what to do with my life, where to go. I would question everything. Sometimes I would be in careers, I would leave careers, I would quit them. I would leave relationships. I would end relationships that had were very promising. And then sometimes I would do something like shave all my hair off my head or
I
or
feel that.
and that was kind of my catharsis. Like I would go through these periods where I would just like, you know what? And I'm just going to shave my head, all the hair, not down to my scalp, but down to like where I was when I joined the military. When I went into the military, they shaved my head down to, an eighth of an inch or whatever they do.
Yeah, yeah.
And that for me was like almost like a relinquishing of it all, like almost like being a monk where I'm releasing my attachment, and I would go through this period of rekindling myself, and then I would grab onto something else, and I still do it. I still do it. I do it all the time, but I try to balance it out as I've gotten older because as I've gotten older, those choices have led me to a great amount of struggle where financially because of my choices I didn't have a lot of money, I didn't have a lot of resources, and and that led to depression, and that led, I'll even admit it, as I've gotten older, because as you get older you it's much easier to feel defeated, to feel like what's the point, to feel irrelevant, um and to feel like I'm never going to be able to get back the things that I could have gotten back if I had only been focused. And that has at times led to moments, I wouldn't say where I've carried out, but where I've thought about suicide, just to be
Wow.
honest.
Wow, that's intense. Yeah, very clear patterns of super high highs with intense focus, especially when passion and purpose are there, but then that that strong body recovery, burnout, confusion phase cycle. Yeah, and contemplating suicide is, yeah, definitely a low place to be. And yeah, what thanks for painting that picture. Really appreciate it. Obviously, I've introduced you as an author and an award-winning documentary. I'm curious to know, what does life look like now, not just materially, but more mentally, and compared to those periods that you picked it, the picture that you painted before.
Well, I reached a point literally like 2 or 3 years ago, um, where I said, well, I'm never going to kill myself. I just, I came, I had a resolution, and I'm like, that's just not an option, right? You might think it, but I'm not going to go through with it. And I have a son, 11-year-old son. I have a wife. I have a great family. And so, in that process, I said, what I need is I need to get help. I need, I need to accept help. I need to look around and accept help and find the pathway. And that's not always easy either. It's not always easy to find help.
Very
When my
hard.
third, yeah,
Yeah,
it's extremely hard. It's extremely
yeah.
hard. I mean, friends don't exactly know what to do with you. And
No,
it's
no.
not always easy to find a good therapist. I've been through different therapists. In my 30s, I had a therapist, and I went to her for a while. And then after like a couple visits, she had me on Stratira. I don't know if you know what Stratira is, but it's a type of pharmaceutical, also medicine that they prescribe for ADHD. And at the time, I was drinking to calm my ADHD and my obsession. I was drinking like a fifth of tequila like every 2 weeks, and I had just gotten to the point where I was drinking it in my straight. I would just before bed I would drink like shots of tequila.
Yeah.
And then she got me on Stratera, so I got off the tequila. And I also used to medicate with marijuana. Marijuana helped me like focus, and but it also threw me into depression, threw me into deep depression. So I was always self-medicating. In my 30s was the first time I tried to professionally medicate. Stratera kind of made me a little bit of a zombie. I did feel like I was stoned without the repercussions, but it also sometimes made me horribly nauseous. And I didn't know enough at that time to coach my psychiatrist and say, This is not making me feel good. I don't want, like, we need to figure out a different change." Like, I wasn't giving a good status, and I wasn't managing my psychiatrists. What they don't or and what they don't tell you is when you put a lot of faith in the medical field. You put a lot of faith in people that have gone through that, and it's hard to push back on a medical professional who's had years of work. And lots of times those medical
Absolutely.
profession yeah, lots of times they're getting advice and they're following their advice, but they're authorities, right? And so it's hard to go, no, that's not, we need to work out something else that's not working for me. But they'll listen. That's not to say they won't listen. It's just intimidating to have that conversation. And I wasn't managing it. So I went off of it. And I also liked myself. I didn't want to change myself. And in my 30s, I felt like I don't want to change myself. I like myself. I don't want to be a flat line. I don't want to go flat line. I'd take these medication. I was like flat line. I like my spikes. I don't like the valleys so much, but I like the spikes. The spikes drive me to do these amazing things, move to Italy and different things that I did in my life. And I was a big risk taker and adventure seeker and thrill seeker. So I didn't want to let that stuff go in my 30s. But as I've gotten older, I realized number one, I need to manage my relationship with my psychiatrist. The guy I did, he wanted me on 20. I said, dude, 20's too high on Adderall. But when I first took Adderall, I'll tell you, I feel like I got out of a wheelchair. I literally felt like mentally I just got out from a wheelchair. The
Yeah.
racing thoughts that would go on in my head that constantly wouldn't shut off, they quieted down for the first time in like years, and I could manage them. And I felt like I had gotten out of a wheelchair, but I was like, dude, this is too much. We need to lower the dosage. I went to 10. He kept arguing with me. 10's low. There's a lot of people that do 10. You'll get used to it. Your body will adapt. I'm like, dude, I don't want 10. I want 5. I want 5. I don't want to feel it. I want it running in the background. I want it running so far in the background that I don't know it, but it's enough to silence the voices. The voices still there. The highs are still there. The highs aren't as high. And so I started taking it, and then I also started going to a therapist and talking just about
Yeah.
talking through life, because when you have this, you also find that you have a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
You're because feel like you've failed so much in life. You aim for the stars and claps, aim for the stars and claps. And you're like, how do those people make it? Because they have like a stable flow of fuel that just kind of shoots them slowly into space, and you're going,
Yeah.
yeah, trauma. So you start to work through that trauma and you start to resolve that. So as I've gotten to this point in life, those things have been ex dialing in those two pieces have been extremely helpful. And then ultimately at the
Yeah.
end of the day, I do a lot of prayer and meditation. I'm
Mhm.
telling you, my belief in God, my daily morning prayer, it does wonders for me. It resets me. I can't express the value of it enough. And then the other elements, all those things, and I work out, and all those things work together to help manage it, right? And
Yeah.
then and now I'm trying to build a trajectory forward towards my goals, and I see a hope. I see a great deal of hope
Yeah.
and a great deal of optimism that because I was in this cycle for so long, because I was in this cycle, this repetitive cycle for so long, I'd lost, I'd begun to think there's no hope, and that's where those thoughts come in. The worst case scenario thoughts come in is when you begin to think there's no hope. I've been here my entire life. I'll always be here. I'm a failure. I'm going to continue to fail. And worse, I'm getting older and I'm less capable to at least have the extreme highs that I used to have. And you begin to feel like there's no hope. And so I have found hope. I've found a great deal of hope um, through that and through my belief in God. And so that's where I am now, man. And I think
Beautiful.
things are on a good track.
And how do you feel that the cycles of really intense hyperactivity, impulsivity, and focus, and then crash and burn, how does that compare today versus before?
Well, I still have it. It never goes away. I just had an experience recently. Things trigger it. Moments trigger it. When Charlie Kirk got shot, do you know who Charlie Kirk is?
No, but maybe you can provide some context of what
Charlie
that
Kirk.
means for you in your life. Yeah,
Did you know who Charlie Kirk was, or you didn't know who Charlie Kirk was?
I didn't know.
Charlie Kirk was now an iconic American kind of figure, controversial figure, but iconic. But he was shot and killed in a public forum. I don't know if you caught that on the news over in Europe, but he was killed, assassinated by a sniper's bullet. Um, it was tragic. It was sad, and it set me off on a course that I wanted to do something. I wanted to take some form of action. I felt obligated to do something, to speak out, to against just violence, uh, against people who use speech to express themselves. Because he was really killed. Inevitably, he was killed for what he says, his words, which I think is ridiculous. We live in a crazy time where people have haven't the ability, it seems, to be able to shut off the words of other people, where the words of other people have become so controversial. I'm confused. I'm actually confused by the whole modern culture, but I'm trying to answer your question without going on a rabbit hole. I'm just, I'm just, I'm just contemplating how to get there because the context is I'm confused by modern culture. A man gets shot for his words, and I felt like, no, that's wrong. Like you can disagree with people. You can turn them off. You can shut off your phone. You can shut off the website. You can
Yeah,
not go to their events. You can tell your kids they're not going to their events.
yeah,
But to kill somebody, no.
that's
And
another
and
level. Mm.
yeah, and in America there was people celebrating for it, his death, and there were other people that were mourning his death. And
Yeah,
for me, it was just simply like, I don't know how you can celebrate it unless you think we're at war. I remember during 9/11, when 9/11 happened and they flew into the towers, I remember seeing video from the Middle East of people celebrating. They were celebrating the perceived victory over their war against the West. The war against, yeah, we're the West. The war against the West. They were at war with us. You celebrate when your enemy is losing the war, and I don't think those people in the Middle East were celebrating death. They were celebrating that there were victory over their enemies. And so maybe that's what those people were celebrating, but I don't see how that's relevant. We're both Americans, but it is concerning because but the point is it shot me into action. And I went on uh, a trip to the memorial, and I made a documentary, and I worked nonstop around the hour, around the clock on this project. I wanted to get it out within like 10 days. So I booked the flight. I went there. I stayed up all night. I flew a red eye home. I started editing. I edited for like 3 days straight, 4 days straight, until like with like 3 or 4 hours of sleep. And then by the end of it, I was exhausted and depressed, and I was kind of working through that emotion. And that's the pattern, right? That's the pattern.
Yeah.
It doesn't completely go away, but the therapy, the prayer and meditation, and the light medication help me land the plane a little bit, and
Yeah.
get back on the road.
Yeah. Do you find that the intensity of the flying high then crashing might be a little less than before? Or maybe if not, then your possibly both, possibly your relationship to the pattern is different than before.
Ah, that's good. That what you just said there was very good. Because I was like, I don't know if it is less, but maybe I'm not as attached to it.
Uh-huh. Be like
I
beating
think
yourself up less or
I
like judging less or something.
the pattern, maybe it's rounded the edges, right? It's less of a spike on the
Mhm.
peaks in the bottom. Maybe it's rounded the edges a little bit. So it's more of
Interesting.
the waves are still there, but I think it's rounded the edges, and I don't want the waves to go away. That's who I am. I
Yeah.
absolutely, when I get a hold of something, an idea, something I'm excited about, something I'm passionate about, I want to grab onto it and I want to run with it. That's thrilling. That's the thrill of life. Um, but I have to be able to still function and come out of that and keep going forward and not like I would in the early days and after college, I would become a hermit. I live and like go into like hermit mode where I would just hide in complete isolation and then reach a point where I'm like, this isn't healthy. And I would just be stoned, smoking marijuana I lived on a sailboat and go play basketball and smoke marijuana and just be like in my own, be almost catonic. Um, and then I would come out of that and be like, this isn't healthy. I need to get out. This isn't a healthy resolution to experiencing life. Like I know I don't have something that I'm super thrilled about right now, but I still need to execute on life and participate in life. I have now and now I'm older, so I have a wife that I need to care for and love and be consistent with and participate in her life on the things that aren't super exciting, like going to a friend's house and having a barbecue. And I have my son who needs me there on a daily basis to support him and take him to school and take him to his friend's house and coach basketball, et cetera, et cetera. And so the spikes are less because I have to be able to even though even though I'm super excited about this video that I made or this project that I'm on, I still have to take my son to school and work out and pray and take care of my wife and be with the family and then work on it and then wait, and et cetera, and go on through that cycle. So it's kind of rounded out the edges and it's allowed me to balance my focus out so that
Yeah.
things that aren't things that don't grab me and incite that hyper focus can still read on the horizon as things that need attention.
Yeah, and you got to make sure that you have capacity for all the things that you value in life, and that's not just work. Um, yeah, I'm curious to know how has your relationship with alcohol and marijuana or other substances changed as well compared to the college days now?
I don't drink or smoke anymore.
Completely quit.
Um, yeah, I just simply quit. Um, I'll have an occasional glass of wine maybe once or twice a year. I'll have just a glass of wine. And even then, I'm like, nah, I'll like go, I didn't really need to do that. I didn't even need to have it. There's not really a point at this time in my life where I feel like there's value in drinking or smoking. I loved smoking pot. I was a huge pothead. I loved gummies and CB, and all things in that space. It incites too much paranoia, um, and doesn't allow for good functioning in reality. While it does provide a great deal of like focus and unique perspective as an artist, I just reached a point where it just didn't have the cost benefit ratio.
Yeah,
It boiled down to the cost benefit ratio. The
cost benefit
benefit just,
ratio.
yeah,
Mm, yeah.
it was like the benefits are 20%, but the costs are 80%. Like I'm out of touch with when I'm high, I'm not in touch with my family, I'm not in touch with my son, I'm being irresponsible, I'm not in touch with anyone. I'm living in my mind. I get so lost in my own thoughts. Like my wife is like, you're not even here anymore. I'm like, I don't even know who you are. Like I get so I literally when I smoke, I literally go to another place mentally.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like a zombie. I'm like a zombie. Unless you're high with me, I don't even know you exist. And I started to feel a certain amount of conflict with my relation. I was like, I can't do this with my son. And then the 80% was then I'd go through a cycle after getting off of it, of being depressed and then I was grumpy and then I was not fun to be around with my family and it just was like, yeah, it's not worth it. It's not worth it.
Yeah, I resonate a lot with what you're saying because I've always had a complex relationship with marijuana. There were times where I was smoking it every single day, then I quit, then I went back to it a little bit during COVID, then I quit again, and then I experimented with gummies, and I think I'm at the point now where I totally quit. And I mean, the important thing that I want to share about that is each of these substances have their cost and benefit, as you say, and sometimes it provides uh, an emotional need that isn't being met, or a practical need, or creative need, or whatever it is. And if we can find ways to meet those needs, or um, if we can realize that maybe actually the benefits are not worth the downsides, then it makes it a no-brainer to be able to quit. And that seems to have been your journey as well as mine.
No, it's
No?
exactly right. And you said something key there is you said I have had a relationship with marijuana and it does become like a relationship.
Yeah.
Um and it's and I find that fascinating. We used to call it Mary Jane. That was the nickname of it, Mary Jane. But Mary Jane it was like a girlfriend. It entertained you. It kept you focused on other things. It kind of but when it come but it took away from my experience and my relationship to life. And in that regard, I just, it's like anything. It's like I heard somebody say once, and I love this saying. He's like someone who was a raging alcoholic. He said, you know, being sober is like having a dead brother. You always miss him, but you know he can never come back. And that's kind of like the deal with all of these things. And I caution even there's a part of me that wants to romanticize them because I have had great moments. And there's no point in lying about it. But it is like losing something that I miss it at times, but it's best that it's not part of my life.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. I am curious to kind of get a bird's eye view of what advice you would share, given what you've been through. Imagine that if I was the version of you from, let's say, sometime in high school or sometime in university, and I'm experiencing these super high highs of intense focus on things that I am really into, but I'm maybe procrastinating a lot of the boring stuff, the life stuff. And then I'm finding myself crashing and I'm experiencing this pattern, and maybe I'm experiencing depression or suicidal thoughts. Now I'm coming to you for advice. What would you say?
Well, I think it's important to ask yourself if this is how you want to live. And if you can answer that question honestly, then you have to say, well, if this is not how I want to live, how do I want to live? Right. And I think that inspires a journey towards finding your path towards a better life. Um, I had to answer, when it comes to the suicidal thoughts, there's just no, I just looked around at the things that I value. I stopped thinking romantically about it and I thought literally about it. The horror that people have to experience after the math. I know a friend of mine who lost his son to suicide, and it was horribly tragic for him. He'll never recover. Um, the horror of the people that are left behind, the pain that you leave, there's nothing romantic about it. And the fact that you're giving up on yourself and your opportunity and the gift that has been given to you by God of life. And what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do to overcome your challenges? What are you going to do to overcome your hurdles? We're all climbing a mountain. We're all climbing our individual mountains. And as you get higher, the metaphor would be the higher you go, the older you get. And the higher you go, the harder it gets. And are you just gonna turn around, are you just gonna give it in? Or are you just gonna throw it in just because you're on a rocky cliff or you're on a steep section or because your chips are down? This life is about building character and it's about understanding ourselves. And I agree with the Buddhists when they say all life is about preparing for death. And for you to cheat yourself of that is not to prepare for death. It is to give up on life, right? And
Wow.
so so you have to see that, you have to ask those questions. And I think anyone who's thinking about suicide, if they put true thought into that and they really think about those questions and really think about not the romance but the reality of what they leave in their legacy, they'll say it's just not an option. And so if that's not an option, then you have to accept help. And the beauty is receiving the gift of help, and that's the premise of Christianity. And the reason I gravitate towards Christianity is the whole premise is that you're receiving a free gift. You're receiving something you didn't earn. And that's that and not and without going too far down that road, it's hard for us to receive things we don't earn, but to receive help from others, if you ask for it, you will receive. Um, and so I think that's the first step, and that's the advice I would offer is ask those questions and really look at the reality of how dark things could be and what
Yeah.
you're leaving behind. Um, and I think I don't think anyone, I think if, I think anyone that's contemplating suicide, I mean, if they really look at that honestly, uh, and there's just so much to live for. There's just so much to live for. There's just
Yeah.
and anyways, I'll leave it there. That's kind of
Yeah,
my answer.
no,
I
that
could
that was a
wax.
beautiful, yeah, it was a
Yeah.
beautiful answer. Very kind of philosophical mindset kind of place to start. I was really impressed by the reframe around death. It's not something I have thought of before, but it's a really powerful one. And given that we're kind of on this philosophical topic, you did mention um, spiritual beliefs. You mentioned daily prayer as a tool that you use, or whether you call it a tool or not, doesn't matter, but a thing that you do. I'd love to know more about how the spiritual beliefs um, are helping with where regards to your mental health picture. Maybe how did you come to that point if you haven't always been doing it? Like what was the journey there?
Well, I mean, I've spent my life trying to understand life, trying to understand God, trying to understand religion, trying to understand spirituality. Um, some people are more rigid than others. I see meditation as a form of mental health. It's a way to clear the mind and put it in a space where you can then insert kind of your intent. And I see prayer as a way of building intent and asking for guidance from something greater than yourself. I think happiness is external, not internal. So solving lots of times we're taught that the resolution is within. I actually think the resolution is external. I actually think that, and I think you'll find it in a practical way, that to be true in a practical way, that if you go to help people that are lesser than yourself, it will bring you great joy. I mean, lesser than yourself, excuse me. I rephrase that. That have less than you have, not lesser than you, but have less, or are struggling, or are. If you go and help people, you will find a great deal of joy and satisfaction and purpose that will fulfill you internally. And that's the most practical way that I can explain the value of seeking external instead of internal. The only, and I say that only because the conflict of meditation is it's a very internal practice towards, and in the Buddhism, it's towards enlightenment, which is mean I can perform enough work to achieve utopia. I don't subscribe to that, but I do think that meditation can bring peace. But I think after meditation, one should go and look external to something greater than themselves, and to perform things that are outside of themselves. Buddhists say after enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. One must always continue to go out and do things. And so that's the philosophy. And then the spirituality for me is the freeing element of the the life of Christ, who said, "Die to yourself, and the death to yourself, and serve others," which is to relinquish your self-importance and your ego and to go out and do something better for someone other than yourself. And I think those are valuable things. So in my spiritual practice, the reason that I think it's super important is um, because I don't know any other way than to say I see it when I'm not and when I am, just like with working out. When I exercise, when I'm not exercising, I get a little frumpy in the gut. Maybe I pull a muscle because I'm trying to lift too much. And when I am, like I'm ready to kind of move when someone needs my help. And I think, like perfect example, parallel examples is like 6 months ago, my transmission went out on my vehicle, and I lost my mind. Um, and then in that time, I've started a daily practice of prayer and meditation. And last week, I had a another major problem with my vehicle. Clearly, this vehicle is turning into an issue. It's time to let it go. But it was a substantial cost too. It was $1,500, but I handled it in stride. Instead of, oh my God, the transmission and now this and letting it ruin my day, I I I was even surprised at myself. I'm like, I'm not even angry. This is just how life works sometimes. I genuinely attribute that to the daily practice of so that's my experience. I can only speak on
Yeah.
experience. I can physically see the difference.
For sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's really incredible. And I've been to a few Buddhist retreats. I've probably spent 2.5, 3 months now in a Buddhist center. And one of the things that they talk about is when you put your focus on others, you don't focus on yourself. And that's where the ego is. That's where we spend so much time in the default mode network thinking about ourselves and our problems, and actually we feel better when we think about others, and it relates to the spiritual thing, and it relates to meditation, and it relates to better emotional regulation as well. I mean, these subjects are all so interconnected the way I see it, and it seems that your experience is confirming the same.
Yeah. No, it's exactly the same at some level. Um, and I've spent a lot of years with Buddhism, and I do think there's a deep understanding of the human experience, and there's a lot of wisdom in that path. And I deviate, as I mentioned, in the quest for enlightenment. I actually think that's internal works based. You work to get there, I don't subscribe to the idea that I can work towards enlightenment.
Yeah,
Or
fair.
I think the body is a fascinating thing. I've done breath work where I've had moments where I felt almost like I was on drugs. I have done breath work and meditation where I have walked out and I've gone to the grocery store and I almost feel like I'm floating.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the world is so colorful and so bright and people are so beautiful. I can't explain that. So I can't
Yeah,
dismiss those moments as irrelevant.
absolutely.
Um, but and now we're getting into the deeper philosophical and structural tones of like what religion, and I think it's important, and we don't have to go too deep, but I think it's important to understand when you begin to subscribe to a belief. I said this to my cousin recently. We were talking about it. It's important to take it to its furthest reaches to understand like what happens if I attain that last place of complete detachment and complete enlightenment and complete nirvana. And I have sought that at times in my life, and complete detachment at some level becomes nihilistic. And you're like, well, what is the point of anything? And so for
Yeah.
me, it's the caution, it's to offer caution to say, listen, complete detachment is nihilism, and life has purpose and meaning. And there is a bigger purpose for all of us here. There is something greater for all of us here. And that's why I subscribe ultimately to Christianity. But I do think the philosophy of
Yeah.
Buddhism and the wisdom of Buddhism offers amazing
That,
ways to live life. I had
yeah.
I have a book, I would be considered a heretic. You know this. If there's Christians that are listening to this podcast right now, they're gonna go, "Oh my gosh, he's a heretic." He's in, which is to say, like he's leading people to a false god in a sense. But so I'm cautious about this. But I used to have a book called Living Buddha, Living Christ, and it paralleled some of the similarities, and there are deviations. And I would challenge you. It's not, I know it's not my job to teach you or any of your audience. I would challenge you and your audience to do your research and understand
Yeah,
the difference. For me, it's clear.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I do think there's value in understanding, and that's my point.
absolutely. No, I think I always talk about spirituality if it is relevant in someone's journey because uh, there are two things. Number one, making sense of the universe, making sense of existence. Like, take your age minus 1 year. Before, at that point, maybe you didn't exist, or at least you didn't exist as you, but now you do. Why? Why is there existence as opposed to nothing at all? What is this gift? So making sense of that, those big
Mm,
existential questions,
yeah,
um, that has a huge impact on the way we see the world, which has an impact on our mental health and how we operate in the world. So that's the
hmm,
reason why we should each go on our journey. And of course, there are many wisdom traditions, many religions. Each of them have their own different angle. So we're not here to prescribe, we're not here to tell anyone what to believe, but to encourage, make the journey for yourself and be clear on what you believe, or make a journey to get clearer on it, because it will help make sense of those big questions and thus improve your relationship with yourself, with the universe, and how you operate in life. So
I think that's so
yeah.
well said. I agree 100%.
Yeah, well, my path, I was born and baptized as a Christian, but I actually grew up in Muslim countries, so uh, I was always seeing multiple perspectives, and then I took a bunch of psychedelics, which also completely changed my worldview and dissolved a lot of concepts. And so since then, I see, yeah, we can, what we believe is based on such a complex story. But anyway,
I think, no, what you're
yeah,
saying, let me just comment one moment,
please.
because I've had those moments as well of kind of psychedelics and those experiences. They break down, they definitely break down the structure of everything. They strip away the attachment. And I think that's a fascinating experience. Um, and so I do think you're right, because I've gone through deconstructionism where I've taken all the attachment off of everything, and then I started to place it back, and I'm like, wait, there is some value in it, right? How these things are built and
Absolutely.
how they're structured, they do end up having different ultimate final results. So I'll cap with, I do think you're right. It's important to understand, and it's important to take a journey through life that questions everything, so that when you do make your decision, you have taken the time to learn all the different pieces. So I'm with you 100%.
Yeah, yeah, and you're doing it from a solid base,
Yeah.
a base that you've actually built yourself, not a base that is conditioned to you as the only way to be. Yeah, I think that's really empowering.
I've always
Um,
said if something's true, it'll withstand questioning.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, Wonderful. So just wanted to kind of recap a little bit of the major topics that we've been through. Obviously, your journey from struggles to today, your ADHD diagnosis, getting help, both from a psychiatrist and therapists, including taking medication, including negotiating through your own empowerment, uh, the dosage of medication that works for you, We've talked about spirituality. Were there any topics that we also talked about that I might have forgotten? Or are there any other topics that were important and relevant in your transformation journey that we haven't yet talked about?
Well, the last thing I'd say is if you want to know more about kind of some of those journeys and some of the things that have taken me on my path and that have brought me here where I am today to be able to speak in the fashion I have, you'll have to get a copy of my book, The Unknown Adventurer, which is on Amazon Prime. That'd be the last thing I'd say. Go get a copy on Amazon Prime, or if you go to my website, endlessmediame.com, endlessmediame.com, you can get a free digital copy and put in when you fill out the form, put in that you saw me on the podcast with Anthony.
Super cool. And yeah, just give us a little bit of a preview about what is in that book.
Yeah, the book is a little bit of everything I talked about, my struggles in elementary, my struggles with academia, my work in filmmaking, my story arc in becoming a filmmaker and a documentary filmmaker and making the two films that you see behind me, plus others. And then it also just tells about my journey spiritually, and it also talks about my love of my life, which is my wife, who is from Italy, who I chased to Italy. And to hear that story, you'll have to read the book, which is probably the best part of the book that everyone loves, is when they discover that I met my wife on a beach in Costa Rica. I knew her for about 6 hours, and I chased her to Italy, and I gave up everything for her. I moved my life and everything and moved to Italy to be with my wife. And I'm happily married after 15 years. But the story is all inside of the book.
Wow, that sounds like a wonderful gamble from an impulse that really I don't want to reduce it to a gamble and an impulse because obviously it's so much more than that,
It
but it really shows kind of some of that intuitive gut feeling, kind of what you're supposed to do as an ADHDer, which might not be understood by most people, but actually you know deep down in your hearts what you should do.
well, that's a bomb right there. And probably an entirely another topic for another podcast. But one thing we never introduced into this was the power of intuition. And I do think that people who are ADHD straddle something in that space that few people do, and that's the sense of intuition, the sense of I almost feel like we straddle between the physical world and the spiritual world. I think a lot of people that are in our space do kind of have this spiritual dialogue that you and I are having that are trying to wrestle between what does the physical world matter when ultimately death is at the end of the equation, and how do I answer that for myself, and why am I here? And we're trying to solve these questions, but we're also deeply intuitive to our own experience in life. And the physical people that are more physical in the world, they make us question. Why would you do that? Why would you move to Italy? Why would you go off and do that? Why do you do those things? I don't understand it. They don't make sense to me. But I saw a heart of gold in my wife, and I knew it from the day I met her because I saw the patterns of life. I had seen those patterns enough. I began to build all the pattern recognition, and I knew when I found a good woman. I knew it. I could feel it. I could sense it. I knew it. And I think, a whole topic for another podcast, but is
Yeah,
intuition, pattern recognition, and an awareness of things that most people don't see.
yeah.
And I think it's a great gift that we can offer others. I think it's a great gift that we offer the world that they unfortunately don't have schools for because they don't because we haven't built a revenue system off of it. There's the only reason we have schools and the only reason that they teach math and English and the subjects that are boring and we struggle with is because they haven't built a system where they can build a machine of revenue from our intuition. In fact, our intuition works against the system more often than it works for us because we tend to know when people are full of shit. You know what I mean? We pick it up
That's fair.
quick. People
Yeah,
like
yeah,
us pick up bullshit quick. And there's no way to build revenue off of that. So we're disenfranchised in some ways and disregarded, and our intuitions are sometimes seen as impulse and wasteful and risk taking. And why would you do that when in fact they are something that we possess, that we can offer to the world, and it's a great gift if you can harness it and trust and believe in it. And I think as I get older and wiser, I'm getting better at that. But I think it's a great topic.
yeah,
Thank you for bringing
yeah.
that up.
No, absolutely. Intuition is such a powerful topic, and yeah, I mean, there's so much on that. So, uh, if uh, if you as a listener are feeling intuitively that you should look into intuition or connect stronger to your intuition, definitely I recommend it. Seems like Barry recommends it as well. Yeah, are there any other topics or things that you want to say before we wrap up?
Well, just capping that intuition piece, I always say it's intuition with information. Okay.
Yeah,
So
balance.
don't be foolishly and don't be foolish with your intuition. If you are hearing this, don't go out and
Yeah,
and think, well, just because I thought that I should, I don't know,
yeah,
move to another country and give up my life. You still have to add information to that. You still have a responsibility responsibility to yourself to be informed in your decisions. But I think there's something deeply powerful about intuition. But yeah, no, this has been great.
absolutely.
I love this. Anthony,
Thank
you're
you.
super talented.
Thank
I'm so honored to have this time with you. I wish I lived over in Europe. I would say let's go. Like I said, I got my little European cup here. I'd say let's go have a cafe or a baguette or something delicious because food is so much better where you are. Jamone, you're in Spain, right?
Near Spain, France.
So the best jamone, the best ham in the world. I mean,
Yeah, we
they feed pigs like cashew nuts. And have you ever had good jamone? I'm sure you have.
I've had lots and lots of good food.
Oh
Yeah.
my God. Yeah. It's the
Yeah.
best it's the best prosciutto in the world. Prosciutto.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. Well, thank you so much, Barry. Of course, your biography and any relevant links will be in the show notes. Yeah, if anybody would like to connect with you other than what you spoke about earlier, about checking out your book, is there anything else that you want to say?
Yeah, everything is at Endless Media Me. That's endless media me.com. You can
Super.
find me there. You can find my work there. You can say hello to me. You'll find an email where you can reach me. I'd love to hear from people when they reach out, and I respond to everybody.
Super cool. Well, thank you so much, Barry, for sharing your inspiring story, your words of wisdom, and yeah, being on the show.
Anthony, this is great. Let's do it again sometime. I'm so honored to meet you, man. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.